Welcome to Wellywood Wargaming, where the grim dark never sleeps. Crack open a bottle of Wild Snake and spark up a low stick as we take a journey down Underhive.
In Necromunda, terrain is everything. It is the game. Let's break down what makes good terrain, how much you need, where to get it, and why your gangs will love you for building better boards. Terrain in Necromunda isn't just decorative, it's functional. It blocks line of sight, offers cover, creates elevation, and, most importantly, tells an immersive story that makes Necromunda a unique game system when compared to other more traditional Games Workshop games. Without it, range gangs dominate, close combat becomes a joke, and your campaign scenarios lose all depth, literally and figuratively. Great terrain makes movement matter, tactics deeper, and every game a cinematic experience. First, let's talk about terrain types. Originally, when Necromunda first arrived back in 1995, the boxed set came with several cardboard buildings that could be combined with plastic bulkheads and walkways, and arranged in different layouts to create what was then an incredible immersive skirmish game. Players were encouraged to build onto this, either making their own terrain pieces from household items or purchasing other Games Workshop kits to expand the experience. When Necromunda was re-released in 2017, the box did something very different, initially giving you a somewhat two-dimensional experience in the form of Zone Mortalis tiles and doors. Initially, the reaction from the Necromunda community wasn't good, and many old players like myself were somewhat perturbed by the lack of 3D play on offer. That said, the 2D tiles were a great way to learn the basics of the new rule set, and actually somehow captured the vibe of Necromunda in essence, but just with a different style of play. It was more like Hero Quest, and I suppose that ain't a bad thing really. Shortly after that, Games Workshop started releasing revolutionary plastic tiles and kits that were so well designed they could be kit-bashed, combined, and jazzed up so much that the options were pretty much limitless. The incredible design of the Necromunda kits did however come at a premium cost, and although awesome in every other way, this put many a credit card into the red and was simply not affordable for some. To add to that, the amount of storage space needed for 9 or more tiles was ridiculous. 3D printers and third-party kits started springing out from the woodwork, resin and MDF, sacrificing the style and design a little for something far more affordable. Of course, there has and always will be the option to build your own Warhammer and Necromunda terrain, and many amazing YouTube creators like Eric's Hobby Workshop and JD and the Sump Sea have great videos and tutorials on how to build your own custom terrain with fantastic results. Once you've decided which types of terrain you'll go with, or a mixture of these options, it's time to start thinking about size, because size matters. The average 3D Necromunda board is usually between 2 by 2 feet and 4 by 4 feet. I usually prefer a 3 by 3 board myself, but there are other things to consider apart from floor space, which we'll talk about shortly. I've found over many years of playing that larger boards with more floor space usually mean that you spend at least your first turn or two moving into positions and getting ready to engage, and this can be a little dull for some when you just want to get straight into the action as soon as possible. Modular versus fixed terrain. Another thing to consider with Necromunda tiles is storage and ease of transport. The term modular is used to describe pieces of terrain that can be broken down and mashed together to form greater variation. While this can give you more options and better use of transport and storage space, the downside is that you can take a lot longer setting up your boards, so it really is a mixed bag. Fixed terrain, especially in the form of ready-made Zone Mortalis tiles, is also modular to an extent, and having 9 to 16 tiles, all made up with varying themes and patterns, is an awesome thing to behold, and far quicker to set up. This is also a problem in terms of storage. So, I guess the ideal scenario for most people is to have a mixture of both ready-made tiles and modular pieces that can be moved around to create even greater levels of customization. Density and coverage. Generally speaking, I would aim for 60 to 70% terrain coverage on ground level. That means the majority of the board should block line of sight, be climbable, or force tactical movement and a bit of hide and seek. Any more density than this can be impractical to actually physically move your fighters around and get your fat little fingers into tricky spots, but also too dense can give close combat gangs a massive advantage. Ideally, you want your boards to be fair between line of sight for shooty fighters and cover for close combat fighters to advance. This balancing act is a very important thing to get right, and too heavy on one side can lead to unbalanced games. Use thirds: 1/3 line of sight blocking terrain, 1/3 elevation, and 1/3 scatter and detail. Height and elevation. Elevation is essential. Your gangs should expect to fight on multiple levels. Every board should give fighters at least 2 paths up, and the more height you have on a table, the more immersive and fun your games will be, as well as making the surface area of your table a lot bigger too, so that a smaller table footprint with lots of height and elevation feels much bigger. Things to consider with elevation. While elevation should generally be encouraged, make efforts to avoid a bowl shape with height around the edges, as this can lead to too much direct line of sight and an advantage to shooty gangs. Instead, aim for height and elevation towards the center of the board, and make sure there is enough access through walkways, ladders, and ramps on all sides where possible. Another cool way to mix things up is to create different floors or levels by having several boards that are joined by a pipe, tunnel, or elevator that goes between board edges, treating these levels as entirely separate boards that can be accessed by going up and down on multiple levels. This means you can't gain line of sight or see enemy fighters on other levels, and creates a really fun narrative spin on the typical flat board. Another thing to consider is how a table that includes Ash Waste's vehicles might look and play too. In Underhive battles, things are much more dense and claustrophobic, whereas in the Ash Wastes, things are far more sparse and open, and often lack height and verticality to enable vehicle movement, and of course, fit the narrative of how different things are out in the wastes. Scatter and cover. Once your board type and terrain is sorted, the next thing to consider is scatter terrain. Debris, ladders, walkways, bridges, and gantries to connect everything on multiple levels, and of course, cover in the form of barricades and smaller pieces of terrain that can be peppered around the board to make for extra obstacles and cover. This is an important step and can really level up your playing experience on the whole. Painting your terrain. Painting terrain can be really rewarding. It takes time and a lot more paint than your average ganger, but you can pull off some great weathering effects, building up detritus and sump debris to create an environment that fits the Underhive perfectly. Playing a game of Necromunda on a beautifully painted board makes all the difference, and it's often a lot easier to achieve than you might think. You don't need too much detail, and often less detail is actually better. You want your miniatures to look good in the environment and pop next to your terrain. Often, dark, gloomy, and realistic colours are best, and skipping on fine details is totally fine, as it would look a little strange to see terrain with more detail than your actual gangs. Again, there are tons of amazing YouTube tutorials for how to paint fast and effective Necromunda terrain, and even if you don't consider yourself a top painter, just a spray primer, a bit of dry brushing, and a few drops of colour or weathering with oils or pigments is all you need to do. Terrain in campaign play. In Necromunda, terrain should grow with the story. Your terrain should complement the gangs and help to create a style of play that is the most fun and engaging. Getting close down to the table and looking through tiny gaps for obscure lines of sight is really where it's at. You can even add blood splashes or skulls on the pieces of terrain where fighters were taken out of action in games or killed, graffiti that's themed on the gangs within your campaigns, or even damage to buildings and walkways as you work your way through a campaign to give more depth and story to everything. All in all, Necromunda is most definitely the most immersive and awesome experience for any gamer, and rewards players who invest time, energy, and of course, a little money into their terrain. But it is most definitely worth it. The more time and energy and love you put into your terrain, the greater the experience and the more memorable your games will become. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and hopefully it's given newer players some ideas on how to go about creating the ideal Necromunda playing environments. And for the older players like myself, I'm sure that you will agree that terrain is life. Thanks for watching. I'll see you down Underhive.